Or for more, we are joined by Dr. Shawn Pruchnicki. He is an assistant professor of Center for Aviation Studies at Ohio State University. Pardon me. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. A lot of questions, a lot of speculation at this point, but just based on what's emerged so far, what are the most plausible scenarios that could explain why the aircraft went down in the populated area shortly after takeoff?
Well, so by looking at the videos, there's a couple of things we need to think about here is that why did the aircraft fail to climb? And when we think about that, we think about the aircraft did not have enough lift. And there can be several reasons for that. One can be that the flaps, the devices that help the aircraft maintain lift, could have retracted prematurely. It's difficult to tell from that video if they're there. It's very unusual for an airliner to be able to take off, or more likely is the engines not being able to produce enough power to be, producing enough thrust to be able to maintain lift. So it's those two things that when we think about how airplanes fly, that's how lift is, produced during this phase of the flight. And then eventually once it becomes faster, then, the flaps come up and so forth. So those two areas I'm very interested in, especially the engines, about, the production of thrust, if they were able to operate at their normal thrust settings.
Yeah. Professor, I want to zoom in on two particular things. One is obviously the loss of power. The other was what the British survivor, told local media. He heard a loud bang, and of course there was that frantic call that the captain made to control. And I'm going to, repeat what he said. Basically, I understand he said, "Mayday, no thrust, losing power, unable to lift." So I'm wondering if you could take us through what the pilots probably tried to do desperately in the 17 seconds or so they had from the time the plane started descending before it hit the ground.
Okay, well, so there's a couple things to think about here. First of all, airliners transport, category aircraft, fly quite well on a single engine. So had they lost one engine due to an engine failure or a bird strike, the airplane should have been able to climb out just fine on the other one. So the fact that it obviously did not is suggestive that possibly both engines are lost. The fact that there was a loud banging noise, and if that came from outside the airplane, then that makes you wonder if something was ingested into the airplane. But what's interesting about the video is we don't see any evidence of that. Usually, like when birds are ingested or an engine itself, parts come apart and the engine destroys itself. You'll see smoke and flames. Sometimes parts of the engines blow apart. And right there, for example, in the video you're showing, there appears to be no evidence of that whatsoever. So that makes you wonder, where would that bang have originated from? Why in fact would that happen? Now, I would like to add one other thing to your excellent question is that a lot of the viewers may not realize that these airplanes use what's called auto thrust. So the thrust is set and is maintained. And, one of the questions that are going to be answered is that as the airplane was starting to climb out, did the thrust automatically come back on its own? Was there some type of malfunction along those lines and they weren't able to get it pushed up quick enough, or that type of system failed? And, because of the low airspeed, the low altitude, confusion in the cockpit, just too much going on at one time, low airspeed close to the ground. This is just one of many questions, but obviously just too low of an airspeed and too low to the ground to be able to sort out a lot of things going on.
And Professor, we are hearing a report of one survivor in seat 11A in crashes of this kind of magnitude. Just how rare is it for anyone to make it out alive?
Well, that's exceptionally rare. Especially the fact that it struck other structures, right? That it hit buildings. It'd be exceptionally rare for an airplane like this to to hit, other forms of terrain. When I first heard there was a survivor, I assumed, which is typically the case, that they were more toward the rear of the aircraft, especially as you can see the tail, as you're showing off to the side there, is in great condition. And that's typically where, if we are going to find a survivor, usually they're back there, as we've seen in numerous accidents in the last 15 years. Sometimes it really is just luck of the draw. It depends on when the aircraft hits and things that are going to come through the airplane, structures that they're hitting as it rips through the airplane and causes damage to the airplane and the people there that are in there, that causes the fatal injuries. Sometimes things just miss you where you're in your seat.
Yep.
Also, the ability to escape from the airplane. Had some other people survive, there maybe were people that just simply were not able to escape, where this person was at an emergency exit, not sure if he was able to use that exit. But a lot of people in bigger crashes like this, a lot of times they don't need to use emergency exits just because the airplanes are so ripped open, they simply just exit through large holes.
Right.
So yes, to answer your question, it is very surprising for an airplane at this speed to impact buildings, especially that far to the front, because there's so much energy being transmitted through the airplane. It takes a while for that to dissipate to something more tolerable toward the back of the airplane.
Right.
Incredibly lucky.
Right. Professor, the plane itself, the Dreamliner, was about 11 years old, as I understand it. Is that a problem? I mean, is a plane's age critical? This is obviously at that time, innovation marvel. Or is it more a function of an airline's safety culture, maintenance, regime?
Well, these are all things that are going to be looked at, but no, an 11-year-old airplane, an 11-year-old airliner is not considered old or ancient. I mean, these airliners are built to typically be flown around 20 years or so, if not more. So 11 years is not an ancient airplane by any stretch. The maintenance history is going to be very important. That's something that they're most certainly going to look at. Pilot training, the culture of the airline, the culture of the transportation department of the country. I mean, all these things need to be looked at. In addition to the wreckage, the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, the investigation. We tend to think of the investigation as being on the scene, but in fact, the investigation also goes very much off the scene and looks at all of these other things. This is why it takes so long to do these investigations when you do them correctly, as I'm sure they're going to. It could take a year and a half to finally get to the bottom of this and fully understand why these things all came together as they did.
All right, Professor, we do have to leave it there. We thank you so much for your time and for your analysis and insights. Dr. Shawn Pruchnicki is Assistant Professor, Center for Aviation Studies at Ohio State University. I should mention as well, we do have an unconfirmed report that one of the black boxes has been found. Unconfirmed, I should add.